Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just dive right in, because today we're exploring one of the absolute most fascinating rabbit holes in all of animal cognition. We're going to tackle a question that sounds super simple on the surface, but I promise you, the deeper you go, the more it completely challenges everything we think we know about the minds of the creatures we share this planet with.
Okay, to start, I want you to picture this. Imagine you're a crow. You're just doing crow things, hanging out on a telephone wire, maybe judging the people walking below. And suddenly, you get tangled up in something. Out of nowhere, this gigantic, strange, bipedal creature, a human, reaches down and gently untangles a piece of plastic wrapped around your leg. What do you actually do with that information? Does your brain process it? Do you feel relief? Or is it just static, just meaningless noise in the void?
And that brings us to our big central question. Do wild animals actually understand our help? It's a binary question, yes or no. But the answer we're about to uncover in this explainer is going to fundamentally change how you view the living world around you.
Section 1. Beyond Biological Machines. To really appreciate the answer to our question, we first need to look at the historical baseline of how science viewed animals.
For centuries, the dominant scientific consensus was basically that animals were just biological machines. They didn't have rich inner lives, they didn't process intentions, they literally just mechanically reacted to stimuli. And this was all driven by a rule called Morgan's canon. Coined back in the late 1800s, it strictly dictated that scientists should never attribute a complex mental process to an animal if a simpler one could explain the behavior. Think of the classic guilty dog scenario, right? If a dog looks guilty after completely destroying your couch, Morgan's canon says, well, the dog doesn't actually feel the complex emotion of guilt. It's just learned that when you arrive home and it makes a certain face, it avoids getting yelled at. Keep it simple, keep it mechanical. But while caution in science is obviously vital, we massively overcorrected. For decades, the mere idea that animals could read social dynamics or actually understand intentions was just dismissed as naive.
Section 2. Evidence of Animal Understanding. But then, the research started rolling in, sparking a massive paradigm shift that actually started out in the ocean.
Back in 2013, off the coast of Hawaii, there was this heavily documented marine biology encounter that completely challenged that old mechanical view. A wild bottlenose dolphin had a fishing hook deeply embedded in its pectoral fin, which was severely limiting its movement. But it didn't panic. Instead, it actively sought out a group of human night divers, swimming directly up to one specific diver, Keller Laros. And the dolphin didn't just hold still. It literally rotated and repositioned its body to give the diver better access to the tangled line. Guys, this wasn't some trained animal bribed with a bucket of fish. It saw a human, made an assessment, and seemingly thought, I can't fix this, but maybe you can. And after being freed, it just lingered. That is not a mechanical stimulus response. That is intent.
And the intelligence scales up in, honestly, terrifyingly brilliant ways when we look at corvids, your crows and ravens. They don't just solve multi-step puzzles or use tools, they actually recognize individual human faces. And the craziest part is that they hold socially transmitted grudges. In a really famous University of Washington experiment, researchers trapped crows while wearing a specific mask. Later on, even crows that had never seen the original trapping event would dive bomb that specific mask. They literally gossiped. They built a reputational profile of a human, shared it with their friends, and recruited others to attack.
But this brilliant intelligence works both ways. People who regularly feed crows often receive gifts left precisely where the food is placed. Shiny objects, buttons, pieces of glass. The crow isn't just taking, it's reciprocating. It is placing you into a social model. So when a crow stays calm and lets a human free it from a trap, this brilliantly illustrates that it's likely running a deeply encoded, incredibly rapid cost-benefit analysis. A walnut-sized brain is somehow completely outperforming our expectations of social sophistication, actively deciding that you are a net positive.
Section 3. How empathy crosses species. Let's explore how evolutionary empathy extends far, far beyond an animal's own narrow self-interest.
Elephants are a prime example of what scientists call cross-species empathy. Now, we'd totally expect them to pull their own companions out of mud pits, sure, but rangers in African wildlife reserves have actually documented wild elephant herds cautiously navigating around injured humans just to avoid trampling them, sometimes even staying nearby until help arrives. And even more mind-blowing, wild elephants have been observed covering the bodies of deceased humans with branches and leaves, which is the exact same mourning behavior they use for their own dead. They are applying empathy right across the species barrier to a creature they have every evolutionary reason to be terrified of.
But knowing an animal feels something and knowing it actually understands the concept of help are two very different things. Researchers in Japan tested this distinction with wild-born capuchin monkeys. They had the monkeys watch a human either actively help or obstruct another person who was trying to reach some food. Unsurprisingly, the monkeys later straight up refused to accept food from the human who was unhelpful. But here is the most incredible part. They also refused food from a human they watched being unkind to a complete neutral third party.
So the absolute crucial takeaway from that experiment is that these animals are making moral evaluations. The monkeys weren't just tracking who was good or bad to them personally. They were judging who was good or bad in general. Wild animals are out there acting as third-party moral judges. They're sitting there, watching us interact with strangers, deciding exactly what kind of person we are, and filing that information away.
Section 4. Stress, Fear, and Genuine Trust. Okay, let's just pause here for a second to address some totally valid scientific skepticism. Because we cannot naively project cinematic human emotions onto an animal that might just be frozen in sheer terror.
When an animal gets trapped, it gets hit with a massive flood of cortisol. Notice the condition we're comparing here. Tonic immobility is an involuntary ancient survival shutdown, where the animal just goes limp. Now, to the untrained eye, that looks like calm cooperation. But experienced wildlife rehabilitators notice stark qualitative difference when an animal exhibits genuine trust. A raptor rehabilitator of 15 years noted that her recovering birds actually change their breathing, their muscle tone, and they even lean into contact. They'll turn their heads specifically toward the sound of her footsteps and completely ignore strangers because she has consistently represented safety and the total absence of threat.
But this does introduce a pretty dangerous philosophical paradox in wildlife rehabilitation. Some animals never relax, and honestly, that is a perfectly healthy wild response. The real danger here is habituation. If an animal learns to associate humans with safety, they carry that trust right back into the wild, which makes them incredibly vulnerable to people who actually mean them harm. And that is exactly why professionals have to use barrier feeding and even hand puppets. They literally have to provide kindness without being recognizably human, saving the animal's life by ensuring it never knows exactly who helped it.
Section 5. The Currency of Kindness. So, if some animals can overcome their evolutionary terror to recognize human help, what does that look like on the absolute grandest scale?
50 tons. I want you to just keep that massive number in your head for a second. That is the staggering scale and lethal potential of a 50-foot humpback whale. A single involuntary twitch from a creature this size could instantly be fatal to a human.
In December 2011, off the coast of San Francisco, a humpback whale became fatally entangled in heavy crab trap lines. A team of tiny, completely vulnerable divers spent over an hour methodically cutting lines just inches away from the whale's body, and the exhausted 50-ton animal held perfectly still. But it's what happened next that just defies simple biological reflexes. After the final line was cut, the whale didn't flee into the deep. It deliberately circled back around. It approached each diver individually, giving them gentle, firm nudges. And then it positioned itself to make prolonged, direct eye contact, an eye the size of a grapefruit, locked right onto the humans who saved it. It distinguished the specific individuals who freed it from the rest of the vast ocean environment.
So, what is the evolutionary why behind all of this? Why would a wild animal have the capacity to recognize help from a predator? Well, the answer lies in their evolutionary architecture. Animals that live in complex social groups like dolphins, elephants, primates, wolves, they're biologically built with the machinery to continuously read intentions, evaluate alliances, and assess threats. And this cognitive tool is incredibly flexible. The physical cues of non-aggression, slow movements, non-threatening posture, calm vocalizations, they very often translate straight across species lines. And this brilliantly illustrates probably the most profound point of all. Wild animals might understand human kindness not because they fully conceptualize what a human is, but because they just know what kindness looks like. The signal is the signal, regardless of the body it comes from. Empathy and help have a universal biological language that cuts right through the boundaries of species. Which brings us right back to you and your everyday life. Every encounter you have with a wild animal contributes to that animal's dataset on what humans are. When you take a second to move a turtle off the road, or you hit the brakes for an animal crossing, that action doesn't just disappear into a vacuum. It echoes. It reverberates through corvid warming networks, through elephant herd memory, through the behavioral modeling of young animals watching the adults around them. You are actively interacting with creatures who are paying far, far closer attention to us than we have ever paid to them.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The next time you step outside,
Remember that you aren't just walking through a passive backdrop of nature. A crow is watching. It is running a facial recognition algorithm built entirely by itself from experience, and it's filing you away in a mental folder. The living world is observing us, judging our actions, and remembering our kindness. So what kind of data set are you leaving behind?